Hi, everyone. Welcome to Celebrating Aviation with Mike Mashat. Today, we're going to look at the great Navy airplanes built by the Douglas Aircraft Company. The story begins in an abandoned movie warehouse on Wilshire Boulevard in Santa Monica, California in 1921. The airplane you see there adjacent to the building is the DT-1 torpedo bomber, Douglas's first production airplane. The DT-1 wait a minute, I have a better idea. What better way to show you the great early Douglas Navy airplanes than through the artwork of a truly great artist, one of the legends, the truly great Robert Grant Smith, better known as RG. I had the privilege of working with RG in the late 80s, and he was a great teacher, a wonderful mentor, and a dear friend. He worked for the company for 52 years, from 1939 to 1991. And let's look at some of the great paintings of the Douglas Navy planes by RG. This actually is a pencil drawing. RG called them sketches. I call them genius. This is graphite pencil on smooth paper. And this is the DT-1 making a rather spirited water takeoff. And if you look to the left in the background, there is another DT-1 equipped with wheels taking off from a carrier, showing the versatility of the airplane. In World War II, the SBD Dauntless certainly wrote history and changed the course of the World War in the Pacific at the Battle of Midway. In the Korean era, we had the AD Sky Raider. This is the Hunter Killer team, the radar-equipped Hunter airplane at the bottom and the armed AD at the top. Here's RG showing a time to climb world record set by the F4d Sky Raid. We'll talk about that in a moment. The F3d Sky Knight, radar-equipped night fighter used in the Korean War and during Vietnam. And a later version of the Sky Raider. This is the redesignated A1E with the crew in the back also. Of course, a legendary airplane, very significant to the Douglas Company, the A4 Skyhawk, shown here as the A4M, the final version delivered to the U.S. Marine Corps. And these are F4d Sky Raids diving down. I have a cute story to share. This painting was done in the late 50s or so. And in 1979, in conjunction with the final delivery of the last A4, RG replicated this painting using A4 Skyhawks in place of the Sky Rays. It was really a mini mural. The thing was about 10 feet wide and about 6 feet high. And the painting was hung over the long escalator between the second and third floor of Building 36, the engineering building at Long Beach. Well, everything was fine, except that as you came down this long escalator, looked up at the painting, it created an illusion that the airplanes were diving down on your head and people were grabbing the handrail for dear life. Painting was taken down about a week later. True story. Well, here's where it all happened. This is the El Segundo Plant, just south of Los Angeles International Airport, or LAX. This is a scene in the early 50s during an open house with all the great Douglas Navy airplanes on display. And here's the man who made it all happen. This is the chief engineer for Douglas, Ed Heineman. Ed actually was working for Jack Northrop when Northrop and Douglas were associated in the late 1930s. He chose to stay with Don Douglas when Northrop split from the company in 1939 to start his own operation. Here's Ed contemplating the leading edge slat of a rather futuristic rocket-looking airplane. This is the D558-2 Sky Rocket. And I'm going to leave this in the presentation because it is indeed a Navy program. You notice the bullet shape there with the flush canopy. This was the first Douglas effort to reach supersonic flight regimes. It was a research airplane. 3 were built. And this dashing test pilot leaning against the nose of the skyrocket is none other than Johnny Martin. Very colorful figure. He was Mr. Douglas's personal pilot. And here you see the canopy has been changed to a more military configuration for better visibility. On November 20th, 1953, NACA test pilot Scott Crossfield flew the air-launched 3rd skyrocket to the first flight ever to twice the speed of sound, Mach 2.005. You notice that the B-29 mothership is in Navy markings. It was redesignated a Boeing P-2B. Well, I call this swept wing ecstasy. Look at this beautiful photo of the skyrocket gliding down to a landing on Rogers Dry Lake. followed by an F-86 chase. And notice that the speed brakes are out on the 86 because these two airplanes are dropping out of the sky like a rock. But just a beautiful early jet age photo. And again, the skyrocket and Navy markings. Speaking of speed records, this machine certainly wrote its share of history. This is the XF4D Sky Raid prototype. And in the hands of these two capable gentlemen, this airplane set some amazing world records. On the left, you have Navy Lieutenant Commander Jim Verdon, who flew the airplane to 752 miles an hour in a low-level speed record run. And on the right is Douglas test pilot Bob Ron, who flew the airplane to 728 miles per hour in a 100-kilometer closed course record. Together, these gentlemen allowed the airplane to become the first carrier-based jet to hold world absolute speed records. By the mid-1950s, the Navy color scheme had changed from the dark gloss sea blue that you saw earlier to what was called gull gray with white undersides. And so here's a late model AD at LAX in the new Navy colors. In 1952, the Douglas A3D Sky Warrior made its first flight, affectionately referred to as the Whale, powered by two J-57 engines. This airplane weighed 82,000 pounds at takeoff, had a 73-foot wingspan, and was 76 feet long. And that made it the largest, heaviest operational aircraft ever to fly from aircraft carriers. At the other end of the size spectrum, you had the A4 Skyhawk, first flown in 1954, referred to as Heinemann's Hot Rod and Scooter. And here's the reason why. When you look at this airplane, it's essentially a cockpit and a Wright J65 engine mounted on a small delta wing. The wingspan is 27.5 feet, and this is critical, and I'll tell you why. The 27.5 foot dimension was the maximum size that a wingspan could be to allow two airplanes to pass each other on the hangar deck of an Essex-class carrier without a wing fold mechanism. That is the secret to this airplane. Here we have the production F4d Sky Raid, and this machine set 5 time to climb records in 1958, including one run from a standing start to 29,500 feet in 1 minute, 29 seconds. This is a Sky Raid of the all-weather Fighter Squadron 3 called Blue Nemesis, based at Naval Air Station North Island in 1958. Probably the coolest color scheme on a jet of that era. And here we see the F4D at left with its successor, the F5D, although this airplane never went in production. 5 F5D Sky Lancers were built. 2 were used by NASA, and one of them became the last airplane flown by NASA test pilot Neil Armstrong before he went on to the space program and other accomplishments, as they like to say. Well, no discussion of Douglas Navy airplanes would be complete without the A4F Skyhawk 2 used by the Blue Angels. This was an airplane that had an upgraded Pratt J52 engine. All the tactical gear and armament was removed. And so it was a very light airplane. It had a thrust to weight ratio of 1:1, which gave it tremendous airshow performance. The airplane was used by the Blues from 1974 to 1986. Love this photo. A favorite trick of the solo pilots was to make the takeoff roll and hit the gear up switch. And as the weight came off the oleos, the gear would snap up and the airplane would remain at its 14-foot radar altitude height above the runway all the way to the end, and then they'd pull up and begin the show routine. At the other end of the show, you had the formation landing. If you've ever seen those motivational posters in the gift shops that say perseverance and success, this one would be called trust. The slot pilot and the 2 solos are there on the left. They land first, and then the 2 wing pilots land second, and the leader lands third, all in this formation. Good trick. Here's Blue Angel number 7. This is a TA-4J used for the promo rides and used by the narrator. I was assigned to fly in this airplane in 1980, and here's a shot of coming down the backside of a loop. My pilot, Lieutenant Commander Randy Pogo Clark, said over the intercom right about here, "You realize, Mike, the team isn't up this high when we're actually doing a show." Right. Well, the A4 story ended in February of 1979 with the delivery of the final airplane at Long Beach. And this piece of artwork by R.G. Smith was created for that event. It shows the A4M, a Marine Skyhawk in the foreground, the prototype XA4D-1 at the top, and the TA4J on the right. And this was made into lithos for that ceremony. But oddly enough, just 3 months prior in St. Louis, the prototype F-18 Hornet made its first flight at the McDonnell Douglas plant, and RG did this painting showing the two F-18s flying over the then brand new USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. You remember the photo of Ed Heinemann at the beginning of the A4 story. This is the gentleman at the end of the A4 story on the delivery ceremony at Douglas Long Beach. Here's the airplane, ship 2960. We didn't quite make 3,000, but at the time, the A4 had the distinction of being the longest continuously produced military airplane in history. That title now goes to the C-130 Hercules. But it was a unique color scheme. It showed the Blue Angels patch on the nose, the flags of the 7 nations that used the airplane, and it's the legendary A4. What else can I say? Just a really significant historical machine. The final airplane to come from Douglas Long Beach was the T-45 Goshawk, a U.S. adaptation of the British Hawk trainer. A neat airplane and now used for carrier qualifying of all the new naval aviators coming out of training. The program production was moved to St. Louis in the 1980s, but this is the end of the story for the Douglas Navy airplanes that came from California. In 2016, I was commissioned to paint a mural of all the Douglas Navy aircraft for the Museum of Flying in Santa Monica, California. The mural is 10 feet high by 20 feet long and depicts a cruise of the USS Forrestal deployed to the Med in September 1958. And it was a very historic, significant deployment because it was the only time in Navy history that all 6 Douglas aircraft Navy types were on the same ship. From left, you have the Sky Warrior, the A4D, the F4d Sky Raid on the deck. Above are the 3 versions of the Sky Raider. This cruise was one of the retirement cruises for the Sky Raider, one of the first for the F4D, and that's what gave the distinction of having all 6 Douglas-built Navy aircraft on the ship. Well, there you have it, the story of the Navy aircraft built by the Douglas Aircraft Company. I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for celebrating aviation with Mike Machat. I'd like to dedicate this presentation to the 3 great men who made this story possible. We'll see you next time.